I was curious what role-playing games you had played before making Darklands and the paper ones, as well as any computer role-playing games, and
Yeah.
any that you feel influenced you. I mean,
Well,
in particular, I'm interested in if you'd ever played any of the Dark Eye games or Traveler.
yes. As a matter of fact, um, I was very familiar with Traveler. Of all of the paper and pencil role playing games, um, I admired Traveler the most, followed by Chaosium's Rune Quest. Um, I was, of course, very familiar with them, and in fact, had helped recruit Peter Peterson, one of the great paper and pencil game designers, into my Microprose, as well as Lauren Schick, who worked at TSR on the D&D stuff. Um, the Both are still in the computer game industry now, in various forms. Um, the I like the Traveler character generation. I always loved, but the character advancement system I felt was somewhat flawed, at least in the early editions, and I knew it would work in a computer game because they had no limits built into the character generation system. In the original Traveler game, the longer you could run your career through the character generator, the more powerful the character you actually had. And this would ultimately lead in the computer game to people being about 90 years old and being super powerful, which didn't seem very logical, and I felt would kind of stick in the craw of most people playing the game. And so for Darklands, we built in a penalty system if you spend too long in the character generator.
Did you play any computer role-playing games?
Oh yes, I have been playing MMORPGs since the early games of the text games back on Genie, such as Gemstone. And in fact, it was those games that actually got me into the MMO industry, which is where I still am now. Um, for example, I've just been playing with my wife. Most recently, Final Fantasy 14, which just hit the stands a few weeks ago. And there are probably very few MMOs that I probably haven't tried at one point or another. While I work as a game producer, my first love still is game design. And as a game designer, I always like to keep up on what everybody else is actually doing, because I feel the art of game design is primarily learning from the successes and the errors of other game designers. It's much easier to learn from actual experience done by others, rather than try to write and read books about something.
So what did you think was defective in those games that you wanted to correct with Darklands?
Well, not defective so much. I think. One of the thoughts we had in Darklands was we didn't want to do just another fantasy game with your typical, orcs, trolls, and whatnot. But we did want to do a fantasy game that was in some way understandable to your average fantasy player. So that means we had to set it in Dark Ages, or preferably medieval times, because people were used to people in armor stomping around and whacking things with a relay of weapons. But the idea of putting it in a historical period and limiting the sort of game options to things that are based around the popular beliefs of that time, suitably adjusted for good gameplay, obviously, was our attempt to be very, very different. And I think it's helped make the game stand out in people's minds ever since.
A lot of people talk about how much they like the alchemy system over the typical magic.
What's always fascinated me about that game is that since we portrayed the Catholic Church and what was probably its complete nadir, how we never got any complaints from any people who were part of the Catholic Church. Now, we were very careful. I was very careful in the manual to say, well, the modern Catholic Church is nothing like this. Nevertheless, it's not a very flattering view of the Catholic Church. And similarly, modern witchcraft and belief in witchcraft is nothing like what was going on then. And we never got any complaints of any kind of religious or philosophical nature. Maybe the game came and went fast enough. It was never big enough in the popular consciousness that it actually triggered any of that. You probably had to get to a success level of D&D or WoW before your average non-gamer takes an interest in what's going on inside the game.
One thing about the game that we've been trying to figure this out. The combat is a real time, but you could pause it and issue some orders. Is that the first time that mechanic was introduced in a role-playing game, or was there? I couldn't think of any earlier games that had that mechanic.
I am trying to think of that. I don't think we had any other computer games that actually had that model that we were trying to imitate it from. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't think so. The closest that we came was in the preceding year, Microprose had published a British title called XCOM, in which you planned out orders, but there it was much more of a board gamey kind of feel where each guy in your squad had a certain number of points, and you said, I use this point for movement and these 2 points for shooting, and you were really sort of spending your points in order to make your people move around. We knew that would be much too cumbersome for the kind of battles we were thinking, especially once we realized we would need a whole lot of fighting. So the idea of just give people some general orders and then let things run until someone pauses it and realizes that bad things are happening and maybe they might want to change it was what we came up with. It still is not a perfect system, but it was the best compromise we could find between someone who wants to have tactical control over the battle, but still see things animate and move in a fairly real-time, quick sort of fashion. What was your feeling about that? Did you feel that actually worked, or did you think it had some hidden flaws in it?
Well, this is something I've talked about with other designers too, this idea of real-time with pause. But I think it must have been very successful because they're still making games based on that mechanic today. Dragon Age Origins springs to mind. But that, Baldur's Gate, those series, was the same sort of mechanic. Mm-hmm. But yet, it seems to be, I think it might have been Tim Kaine, who designed Fallout. I was talking to him about this, and he said that the advantage is that I guess the combat moves faster, but he didn't like the way that some of the area of effect spells, things like that, could get affected by it. But
yeah, it has its problems from a player's standpoint. The biggest problem is that things can go south on you very, very fast. And you can suddenly realize, oh, shoot, five seconds ago, I should have stopped and changed, and now somebody's dead. And if you have a lot of graphical effects that are attached to various combat actions, you can find that the graphics can obscure what is actually going on. Finally, if the battle is fast, a player will find themselves watching the technical readouts for all of the player characters and opponents involved in the battle, and may cease to actually watch the graphics. I think the advent of MMOs, where a lot of different players can all group together, and each player can concentrate on running their one character, have largely solved this problem and brought role-playing gaming back into its sort of original feel of a group of people getting together to play a game. One of the great things I like about MMOs is that you can also truly role play if you wish to, because nobody knows who the real person is, and so you can play whatever role you wish for whatever character you're currently guiding. You can get a sense of role play and a sense of fictional reality in MMORPGs that were much more difficult in a paper and pencil game, because you could always see that real person right beside you on the tabletop.
I was reading some of your earlier interviews about Darklands, and I wanted to mention that there were some things that you wanted to have in the final game that for whatever reason that they didn't pan out. Can you discuss a few of those things?
We quickly realized with the amount of artwork that we had to generate, because Darklands was probably one of the last games that used sprite graphics rather than 3D graphics. 3D graphics were just coming in, but we did not have enough technology and not enough experience with 3D graphics to actually try to use them in Darklands. And so that is 3D graphics for human characters. And so all the sprite graphics, the sprites are 8-directional sprites, and there's a different set of animations for each of the 8 directions. Each of those animations is handcrafted, blah, blah, blah. So if you're putting on them on horseback, you're now doubling the amount of sprites you need for every single type of player character and every type of armor, plus all the different kinds of horses. So you have the mix and match there. So it doesn't just double your graphics load, it multiplies it by 3 or 4 times. And we were already struggling trying to get all of our artwork done as it was. So it was transparently obvious that even though most small groups of knights and fighters at that time period traveled on horseback, and in Germany at least still tended to fight on horseback, even though mounted cavalry fighting had been demonstrated in the Hundred Years' War to be not always the best tactic. For example, the English almost always fought on foot rather than mounted, for very, very good reasons. Even though it was historically appropriate and was all the rest, we said, nah, it's just going to be much too hard. And only now are MMORPGs finally starting to experiment with mounted combat as well as foot combat. I think for very good reasons, and they're largely to do with how difficult it is to make the game.